Hey guys, it's Phil Cook here, answering of your question who asked me about a pathway to flying cargo. Now, obviously, just like any aviation job, whether you want to fly passengers or cargo, there is no specific pathway. There are many different routes. Uh, I chose one route, and it may be different for you. Uh, Especially at this time, we have such an unusual situation in which there are so many um, pilots who are just transitioning so quickly through the airlines. You don't necessarily have to be stuck at one place like you used to back in the day. There's a bit of a slowdown now, but it's still relatively quick. I the company I work for now, I shouldn't even be here now. I should still be at a regional versus flying a 7.6, or just a few years ago, that would have been unheard of. Um, so my pathway from flying, from first getting my commercial to flying cargo, I started off as a flight instructor. As a flight instructor, I worked for Fly Compton here in LA, and I did that until I got to about 700 hours. After 700 hours, I was right seat for a small company flying the PC-12 under their pilot development program. I was there until I got to around 1,200 hours, and I got my 135 captain mins, and we'll get into that a little bit when we start getting into more of the operations. After that, I left that company, and I was a caravan captain for West Air. West Air is a relatively large cargo company based out of Fresno, and I was out of their Ontario base since I live in LA. They were recently bought by Empire Airlines, and so Empire is now like one of the largest FedEx feeders in on the West Coast that you can come around. They have a couple companies that are similar to them on the East Coast, and we'll get into them. We'll talk about that when we start getting into the different type of operations you can fly for. Uh, After leaving West Air, I was supposed to go to a regional, but due to delays, I was I ended up having to go back to working at a 135, and I flew for Surf Air. I was as a PC-12 captain. I really like the PC-12. The company was more of like a charter company and scheduled charter. So, we weren't just flying regular passengers, we were flying people who were paying a lot of money to fly up and down the West Coast. Uh, Surf was bought by Southern, and it gave me the opportunity to go out to Honolulu and fly the Saab 340. After working for Southern and flying the Saab 340, I was able to get my ATP and my PIC type on the Saab 340. And I only flew with them for about a year or so. Uh, I was planning to, go back to a regional, uh, but an opportunity came up, and a friend of mine applied to work for Air Transport International, and I was hired relatively quickly for them, and ended up flying for them. We fly the seventh. I now fly as an FO on the 767, 300s. We mostly fly Prime Air for Amazon, but we also fly DHL in the 76200s. We fly UPS, and we also fly the 75, and we fly that doing military contracts, and we also have a combi, which is part cargo, part passenger, that will fly all the way out to Diego Garcia, Singapore, and Japan, as well as Thule. Uh, and we also have a couple flights down to Central America for DHL. So that was my path. Again, we're in an unprecedented time, so you can easily transition to a cargo airline without having to faff about anymore. It used to be back in the day, if you wanted to go to a cargo airline, and if you want to get to the higher echelon of cargo airlines, it's still like this. You kind of have to either be a CFI or work for 135 and build that time, then go to a regional and build that time there and start throwing out apps. But now that we have so many of these companies that pretty much we're like the low cost airlines that are flying cargo. It's much easier for you to get into a jet flying 121 for a low cost cargo airline. So just like you have airlines that you think of like Spirit or JetBlue or Frontier and Allegiant, we have low cost cargo airlines that are very prevalent in the cargo world. And then we've got pretty much our legacies, which is going to be the big boys out there. So first and foremost, so first and foremost, keeping that in mind, it also depends on your situation. Uh, the ups and downs of flying cargo can really determine where you want to be. If you want to hit that long haul, fly big jets and stuff like that, then you're going to go for one of the big 121s, but you got to build that time. If that's your goal, don't really waste your time at the smaller 135 cargo carriers. There, it's a good life for that situation, but it takes longer to build that time. You're not going to be putting in, 7, 8 hours a day like you would if you were working for, let's say, a 135 scheduled passenger carrier. Um, you're going to be flying maybe just like 2 to 4 hours a day, maybe 5 or 4 days a week, and it's going to be much slower versus flying passengers. So if that was your goal, you might just have to put up with flying passengers for a bit and then transition to a low cost cargo airliner. But if you're in the situation in which you don't want to fly jets, maybe you don't want to fly for FedEx or UPS or Amazon, or you don't want to fly for a low cost carrier, but you want a better life knowing that you'll accept the lower pay, there are plenty of feeder pro companies and smaller companies that will do the job. When I flew the Caravan for West Air, it was definitely a situation in which we were home every day. The pay wasn't great, but it was still better than most smaller budget passenger 135s. Um, and by better, I mean like we were making anywhere from the $60,000 to $70,000 range, maybe topping out at like 110 or so, depending on where you were. But I flew for like 2 hours in the morning, spent the entire afternoon in a hotel waiting to fly back to Ontario in the afternoon, and I was home every afternoon. I had days where I would fly for like 2 hours. It tops, I would get a short run where I'd fly for an hour up, sit there for a bit, fly back, and then just sit on reserve and then just go home. There was a lot of leeway there that you just don't get with a lot of other companies. So if that sounds interesting to you, we'll start going into the different type of operations that you can fly as a cargo pilot. Now remember, if you are interested in flying for a large cargo company and you want to get to a jet as quick as possible, I would not waste my time at a 135. I would just put in your time, fly either as a flight instructor to build that 1500 or fly for a commuter passenger airline 135. You will get the time faster. You're not going to make as much money. Your life's going to suck. You might be based somewhere else. You might be running, 6 legs, sometimes even 8 legs a day, but you're going to build that time faster and you're not going to waste that time, and you're really just going to get to that jet and just have much more time to build that jet time, build that career, work for a low cost cargo airline. So when it comes down to it, you're going to have two major operations when it comes to cargo. You're going to have your Part 135, and the thing about Part 135 is you're not going to be flying a jet most likely. There are some companies that are 135 that you might be lucky to get right seat in the jet, but most of them you're going to be flying a turboprop. You know, now the thing about getting into a 135 cargo carrier like West Air or Empire or Mountain Air is you need to meet the 135 captain qualifications. So you're gonna, so the 135 captain, wrong way. That's a funny little deal right there. Let's see here. Here we go. The 135 captain qualifications, uh, Part C, Section 2, says that in order to fly IFR, single pilot, you got to meet the 135 captain qualifications. You got to have at least 1,200 hours of flight time, including 500 hours of cross country flight time, 100 hours of night, 75 hours of actual or simulated instrument, at least 50 hours in which we're in an actual flight. So that's the big thing right there, right? If you do not meet the 135 hours, it's going to be hard to find a job flying like a Caravan or for some of the other planes we'll talk about here in a second. You can get that through being a CFI. You can get that for survey flying, whatever. But without the problem is with a lot of cargo carriers, they do not have PDPs. And the PDP is the pilot development program, which allows you to sit right seat and work as a first officer. A lot of these companies are single pilot operations, and you're going to be the only one there. So you need to be captain qualified, IFR qualified, and proficient under the 135 PIC IFR captain requirements. So if you're still building that time, start getting that time in. If you're CFI and you're really interested in working for 135, start getting that time in. If you're just paying to go, make sure you log these things. Make sure you get this under your belt, because without it, you're going to have to show it when you go apply for these jobs. So a lot of these companies, you're going to find you're probably going to start off by flying a Cessna Caravan. Cessna Caravan is a very capable aircraft. It's a turboprop. You're looking at like around 600 horsepower. 600 horsepower. It again, single pilot, IFR. You're most likely not going to be flying into too much icing, depending on the operations. The big companies you're going to find flying these guys is going to be West Air, Empire, and Mountain Air Cargo, depending on which part of the country you're in. If you're up in Alaska, I believe that's Empire. Empire's all the way down in Seattle's their big base, Ontario, San Diego. You start getting the Mountain Air Cargo, you're going to find those guys, and I believe they're in Dallas. They're in Denver, I believe. And you're going to find them a lot in the East Coast. Now, another big company you're going to find is going to be Ameriflight. Now, Ameriflight, let's see if I can find it here. I got some fancy little links for you guys to see. So here's Mountain Air Cargo. And so Mountain Air Cargo and Empire fly a multitude of aircraft. Right? You're going to start off with a Caravan. Then they recently started flying the Cessna 408, the Sky Courier. Now, when I looked at Empire, we had a lot of Caravan pilots who wanted to fly the 408. It's also single pilot rated. Now, for these guys, you still need your 1,200 hours, your 135 PIC time, but what you're also going to need is a lot of them, they will not even look at you unless you have at least, up to at least 300 hours of multi-engine time. So if you're interested in doing that, you can fly the Caravan, but you really got to knock out that multi-time. If you're also looking at Empire and Mountain and you want to stay around, let's say, a little bit longer, a lot of these companies also will have the ATR 72 or the ATR 64, I think it is, or 42. Yeah, I think most of them fly like the ATR 42. And so in order to fly the ATR, you're going to need your ATP. And so if you don't know about ATP, you can look that up. But basically, you're going to need your 1,500 hours and the same requirements as a 134 captain. But instead of the 1,200, you're going to need 1,500. But a lot of these companies will have pathways that'll flow you to flying the ATR. Let's see here. Let me get more out your way here so you guys can see a little bit better. There you go. So you're going to need, you can flow into a lot of the ATR programs. Now I'm going to tell you this. I've met a couple guys who were ATR pilots, and one of the things they will tell you is, yeah, it's nice flying the ATR. You get your ATP. This time will help you build time that'll be applicable towards working for a jet and even being a PIC on a big jet. But the problem with these airlines is a lot of these cargo companies, just these feeder cargo companies, they don't go far. You know, if you work for, let's say, Empire and you're based out of Ontario on the ATR, they literally only fly from Ontario to Santa Barbara. It's like a 20-minute flight in the ATR, and they do that like twice a day. So I've met a couple guys who were FOs on the ATR at Empire, and the first thing they'll tell you is it takes forever to make captain, and a lot of them end up just putting in some time and end up just going to a regional or applying for a low cost carrier and just building their time that way. But if that's what you want to do, I get it. You know, I loved flying the Saab. It's a fun plane, and I love turboprops. I love especially multi-engine turboprops. Now, a good way to consider building that multi-time to fly for a large company is to look at a company like Amerijet. Or not Amerijet, I'm sorry, Ameriflight. So, Ameriflight, that's Empire right there. Let's see, where's my Ameriflight? I thought I had the link in here somewhere. Maybe I didn't save it. Yeah, you know, I like to do my stuff off the cuff, so here we go. So you got Ameriflight. So Ameriflight has a bit of a reputation, and their biggest reputation is they like to fly old planes. A lot of cargo companies fly old planes, and so the Ameriflight is a multi-engine turboprop 135. Don't quote me on it, but I believe that in order to apply for a job at Ameriflight, you do have to, again, have your 135 PIC qualifications, but you also need to have at least 100 hours of multi-time, is what I remember from one of the people I talked to. Don't quote me on it. They may have different qualifications depending on the time of the year. Maybe they'll want more hours. Maybe they'll take less. You know, who knows? But again, they're notorious for flying older aircraft. They fly aircraft like the BE 99. Why did that open up like that? They fly the BE 99 here. Again, it's an old aircraft, very old aircraft, not so fun to fly. And so some people just don't like flying that guy. Let's see if I can get out of this. There we go. Some people don't like flying that guy. The next one they fly is the Metroliner. And so, if you know anything about airplanes, the Metroliner is not a fun plane to fly, but it's a multi-engine turboprop, and all that multi-time just helps you get into a larger, bigger gig if you're really interested. And again, these are just older airplanes, so you're not going to have all that fancy technology. I've heard some people who worked for Ameriflight who basically had no autopilot and had to hand fly into IMC. I believe they also in certain locations have the is it the BE? Is this the BE one or the 1900D? Yeah, so this is the 1900D by Ameriflight, and then they also just recently, when I went through training, started flying the Saab 340. Now the great thing about Saab 340 is because of its weight, it's probably like the largest airplane they fly. Because if you end up in the Saab 340, not only will you get your ATP for them, so it means you got to be at ATP mins, but a lot of those hours can be applied towards your 121 PIC time because of the size. So it's something to keep in mind if you're going to work for these 135s. So you're going to spend time at those companies, but some of the things that are kind of incentive towards companies like Empire, Mountain Air, and Ameriflight is some of them do have. I'm not going to say some will call it a flow, some will call it a pathway. It's neither. really what you're going to have is you might be lucky to get a guaranteed interview. That's basically all you're going to get, right? Now, I've heard plenty of guys who were at Empire who went through the pathway, they fulfilled their time, they got the interview and still weren't hired. I've even heard of guys who went through the pathway, did their time, and didn't get hired, but then applied outside of the pathway and got hired. So, one of the things about the larger 121 companies, your UPS, your FedEx, uh, is they are about as selective as they can be. Really, you know, to like FedEx, I've literally heard people say the only way to get into FedEx is if you know somebody. FedEx is a very hard company to get hired at. You know, they are one of the top paying cargo companies in the world, really. Uh, but it's extremely difficult to get in there. If you are not a 121 qualified pilot, or if you don't have a one, let's say you've never flown a jet, and you don't have that jet time, you don't have that large multi-engine turboprop time, it's pretty much impossible to get into FedEx. I think what a lot of people really do to get into companies like FedEx or even be considered is really just work for a regional, fly passengers, maybe work for a low cost carrier. At this point, I think if you're flying for like Spirit, you're flying for Southwest, you're flying for ATI, you're flying for some of these other low cost airlines and low cost cargo airlines. You, if you're not if you don't have that experience under your belt, then it's really hard to get in. You look at UPS, and UPS requires you to have 1,000 hours of PIC turbine time, and it has to be pretty much 121 jet time. So if you don't even have that, then you won't even be considered for UPS. They are the creme de la creme. That's the top right there. You're going to get the highest retirement. You're going to get the highest scaling of pay. You're going to be flying big jets all over the world. If that's what you want to do, you really don't have to work at these 135s. You can just skip all of this, work like everybody else at a regional, or work as a CFI, make your way to a low cost carrier at this point, and just trudge away at flying those small jets, and you know just deal with those passengers until you can really get to those big cargo companies. So once you so if you're not interested in the 135 time, but you have your ATP minimums, and you're interested in maybe not going to a regional. You heard about the regional life sucks. You may consider going to a 121 pretty much uh, budget airline or low cost airline. Some of the low cost airlines that you're going to come across is going to be like your Amerijet. Here's Amerijet. They fly the 7.6. They have a limited number of routes. I see them on the West Coast all the time. I've seen them in and out of Cincinnati here a couple times when I fly in there. Uh, you're looking at Atlas Air. Oh, this is Kalita. Sorry. You got Kalita. Now, Kalita's pretty cool because Kalita not only has their 7.4s, you could fly out of Detroit and do their Kalita charters. I thought about that. Um, Here you got Atlas Airlines. Atlas Airlines, you know, I think Atlas Airlines really is the same as all of them for all these low cost cargo carriers, but they consider themselves a little more creme de la creme. They consider themselves on the higher end, but really you're going to be making around the same money. The cool thing about Atlas is you have the opportunity to do more international flying. Where if you work for Amerijet or you work for Kalita, you'll most likely do a lot of transcon flying between the West Coast and the East Coast of the United States. Same thing with ATI. ATI works for a big company called ATSG Group, and so there's ATI, there's Omni, there's ABX. They're all the same. They're literally owned by the same group, and they do the same flying. ABX flies mostly DHL, but they also fly Amazon. It's the same company. So if you're interested in one, it's the same thing. It's going to be same pay scale, same stuff. You're going to start around the same pay. But with Atlas, you just have the opportunity to do a lot more international flying if that's really what you want to do. Me personally, I'm not into international flying, so I spend in my military days. I spent a lot of time overseas, and I just don't see the purpose of it. I like to be home as much as possible, as like some others. So Atlas, has a pretty diverse fleet as well. They don't just fly 747s, and so you have the opportunity to fly 777s and 747s and all that stuff. And you could almost and right now, because a lot of these companies are hurting so much, you can almost use these low cost cargo airlines as your regional, which is again an unheard of thing. You know, I apply because I've known plenty of guys who are working for low cost airlines who literally had less than a couple hundred hours at a regional or had no regional time and got hired at Atlas and ATI and Kalita and all these companies. They're really just trying to get as many as they can in the door. So you can skip the E175 flying and go straight to a 777 or a friggin' 74. That's going to look really great if you're interested in, flying for UPS or FedEx, or even going back to passengers and flying for Delta, American, or United. We had plenty of guys at ATI who left ATI to go fly for, Delta especially. And so, of course, ATI is the company I fly for. Like I said, it's a low cost cargo airline. You're not going to make as much money flying passengers. You'll make more money flying than a regional, especially past that first year. But you're not going to make anything close to working for, United, Delta, Americans, Southwest. Definitely not as much as FedEx or UPS. Let's see here. And so to fly for all these companies, you're going to need to be 121 qualified. So you're going to need your 1,500 hours. Uh, a lot of these companies didn't give ATPs, but I'm seeing more and more of them allowing you to take their ATP with them. Some people have had to pay for their own ATP and they're giving the exam. Some people have come in and they've paid for everything. So it's different. A couple other small 121s you're going to look at is like there's Air Cargo. I like Aloha Air Cargo. They just merged with NEC, and so NEC flies. I've seen them all over, but since they've merged with Aloha Air Cargo, you can fly to Hawaii and all that stuff, and they've got some pretty cool little flights to back and forth to the West Coast. That's another low cost 121. And so, same thing with like Sun Country. I didn't put Sun Country on here, but Sun Country, you can opt to fly cargo. They fly the small 737s for Amazon. And then obviously, you've got the big boys. You've got your FedEx, your UPS. Um, let's see here. Cool little picture on the FedEx ramp. And so, again, you got to be 121 qualified. If you're going to UPS, you got to have your 1,000 hours of PIC turbine time before they'll even look at you. FedEx, all I can say is if you're going to FedEx, start making friends, go to these association meetings, start racking up those letters of recommendation. He's like, get as much of that PIC time as you can get in jets. I'm going to be honest, even with a flow, the possibility of going to FedEx straight an ATP is going to be near impossible. You're most likely going to have to fly either for a low-cost carrier, whether it be cargo or passenger, before you'll even be considered for FedEx. But it's worth it. They are one of the biggest they're one of the highest paid companies in the industry, and that's where you want to be. Same thing for UPS. UPS is a big boy. You could almost consider them the legacies of cargo. So in order to get to these companies, you got to meet that 121 mins, and also be aware that you also need to you have that 65 age retirement age. So the cool thing about that though is if you retire or you're past that age, you can still fly for the 135 cargo feeders. I've met plenty of retired airline guys who flew, the Caravan and all that stuff, and they loved it. It was a really cushy gig. It was a nice supplemental income. Here you got the Purple Pathway I was talking about, and again, the Purple Pathway, they build it up to be this really sensational program that will get you in the door to a company like FedEx, but really, FedEx is the top. They don't have to accept you. It really just gets you a guaranteed interview. And, who knows? Maybe you're an outstanding individual and somehow you got a bunch of jet time that would love to, they'd love to get in. I know at Empire, the concept for our flow was you did 2 years on the Caravan, you did 2 years as a captain on the ATR, and that made you qualify to apply for FedEx. So, does it always work that way? Probably not. But it's something to look forward to. It's something to try. I've heard more success with people who flew Ameriflight and did the pathway through Ameriflight and were able to get hired at UPS. Again, I can't guarantee that that's a thing, but it's something to look into. So that's my little overview of cargo life, cargo carriers to look out for, what to and to not do. Again, I just want to summarize. If you are just interested in flying a jet for a cargo carrier, do not waste your time at a 135 cargo carrier. Do your time in a budget 135, getting that time flying passengers. It'll go by faster. If you're just doing the CFI life right now, a lot of these companies are hiring straight out of CFI. Yeah, with your 1500, with your ATP, CTP done, a lot of these companies, your Kalita, your ATI, even Atlas, a lot of these companies, they're hiring these guys because they just can't get them in the door fast enough, and they can't keep them because the legacies, they're hurting just as much, and they are picking these guys out of these companies. ATI lost 30% of their pilots, before I came in to Delta. So I would personally try to get those hours as fast as you can, wherever you can. Don't waste your time at a 135 cargo and just get into that jet. If you can skip a regional and just go straight to a low-cost cargo carrier, I would do that. You'll just find that you're going to have a much better experience. You're going to get those hours faster, and it really just comes down to time. It really just comes down to time. You want that time as quick as possible. You want to get in and out as quick as possible. Get that jet time as quick as possible. Without it, any dream of working for one of those legacy cargo carriers, your UPS, your FedEx, is going to take a long time. So consider that. Working for a regional, like your SkyWest, your Mesa, your PSA, yeah, that'll help you as well because you're still building that PIC 121 time. So it's something to consider as well. So yeah, that's my answer. It's been a little bit of a long video. Hopefully I got you guys some good information. Keep asking those questions, and I'll try to answer them as much as I can. And thanks for all the support. If you guys have any more questions, leave them down in the comments, and keep watching for future videos.